Yo dude, how's it going? Welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to show you how to paint faces. We've done a tutorial recently on painting a dark skin tone, which you can find if you click the link up here in the top corner. But today we're painting a Chaplin model from the Indomitors set, and this is a very different style of face. Rather than something that's fairly clean cut and has no real damage, just a nice well-rounded face. Instead, we've got something where half the face has been torn away, there's bionics there. We want to have something that makes it look like this guy is scarred, battle-worn, and has definitely seen some action in his lifespan. I'm going to show you how to make your faces look a little bit more like they've been through the mill. It's also going to show you a good way of adding in more variety to your skin tones. After all, if we look at the flesh on my face in a fairly well-lit environment, you'll notice that while there may not be much of a change in value on my face, i.e. in terms of how bright the skin tone is, there's quite a lot of change in colour. We've got a little bit of red around my cheeks and nose. We've got the fact that I haven't slept particularly well over the last few days. We've got a little bit more of a yellow up here on the top because the light is yellow. And of course, we've got a darker colour right down here on the bits of my face you can actually see because of my stubble. And I'll show you how to put all of that onto your miniature. Let's get to it. Okay, so here we go. Here's the paints you're going to need to replicate this skin tone. As you can see, we've got the GW equivalent or closest to every one of the paints that I've used here. Some of them, if I'm honest, are not going to be as good if you follow the GW paint scheme, but a lot of them are pretty interchangeable. We're kicking it off with some Cadian flesh tone. You want to thin this down. You're going to need a couple of coats, and just take your time and get a good solid foundation for the rest of the paint job going at this point. It's really important that you do that to ensure you've got a solid basis for the rest of the paint you're about to use. Then thin down some Bugman's Glow, get it to a nice glazy consistency, and just pop that across all of the recessed areas of the Mini. This is much better than using something like Reichland Flesh Shade, which has got too much of a harsh sort of dark line finish to everything. We want to hit those recesses and make them darker, but not that dark. Okay, so here's the part where we paint the eyes of the Mini, and this is tricky, but let me give you a couple of tips. Firstly, do it this early on in the model. We're going to put a lot of other things around the face, and they're going to come up to the eye. The last thing we want to be doing is repainting all of those. Secondly, getting nice dark black colour for the sort of background, the shadow, the detail of the eye, but don't use white for the cornea. You want to have a very close to white but off-white colour, so I use sickly skin. The problem with it being too bright is that the eyes look like they're boring out of the head at you, and it's a little bit like a searchlight and less like an eye. So pop that in, cover the cornea with it, but try and leave a little line around the edge. I obviously managed to screw it up, so therefore we put a little bit of black line in there just to give that nice bit of detail. And then the biggest tip about doing eyes is to not panic. If you mess it up, like I just did, simply white it back out and try again. If you're finding that the paint is drying on your brush a little bit too quickly and you can't quite get to the eye in time, add a little bit of flow improver. So you've got some drying retarder in there. It will help you out. Otherwise, take your time and just be patient. Practice makes perfect. Now, if you're liking this video, why don't you do me a favour and give it a cheeky thumbs up. Maybe even hit that subscribe button down below the stream and ring the bell as well, so you can be notified of the other videos that I put up. Spoilers, it's Thursday at 8 most weeks. So once you're happy with the eyes, we can move on to the next stage of painting this face. That's the thing that you need to get done first, though, is just ensure you're happy with that. We're taking some beaten purple, we're thinning that right down to a glaze, and here we're going to start painting the darker shadows around the eye. This guy's been on a battlefield potentially for days or even weeks being a Space Marine without much in the way of rest, so he's going to look a little bit tired. It also adds a nice little splash of colour to the miniature. You want to get into all of the little recesses around the eye. Put it on in some very thin layers, let each one dry in between if you feel you need to. But just make sure you've got a nice purple spot to the mini. Then I'm going to take some red. I'm going to start emphasizing the sort of capillaries under the skin around this guy. I find a good place to do that is anywhere where you have like your nose, any areas of battle damage, like this horrendous tearing of skin across this guy's face. And then especially on Space Marines, any of the like service studs or so on that they have in their heads. This guy's got 3 on the one side. A little bit of irritated skin around those starts to make the whole thing look a little bit more natural. That's going to give us loads of different variety in our color, but we can go further. I'm taking some Thamar black and some Signar blue base, mixing those 1 part black to 2 parts blue, and then turning that glaze into what's essentially going to be our stubble on this guy's face. We're darkening up the lower parts of the face, but importantly, we're not doing so with like flesh shade or something similar. We're doing it with a color change. So this little hue that we're putting on here is going to start to look like stubble once it's dry. I did, I think, 3 or 4 passes with this mix before I was happy that we built up enough of that kind of 5 o'clock shadow sort of look to things, and then we could move on to the next step. This next step for me was getting the metallics done. So use the metallic black from Vallejo Model Airline. If you haven't used those, I strongly recommend trying them out. Great coverage and very thin paints as well, so you're not going to obscure any detail. So earlier on I said about how the value is about the same from the top of my head to the bottom of my head. There's not a lot of difference. A lot of people will go for something that's very dark down here and super bright up here. And unless you're completely bold and there's like a bright light shining on top, that's never really the case. So we've only varied our skin tone a little bit, and with our highlights, we don't want to go too far. I'm adding in for every single highlight that I do on a miniature, a little bit of Sickly Skin. Sickly Skin is a great product to use. It's a bright off-white, we used it for the eyes, and it's a good way of keeping the skin tones fairly sort of together. The last thing you want to do is make it look like this guy is stood underneath like a super bright light when the rest of his armor isn't going to look that way. The face is something that's a focal point on the model, and it must look right. So it needs to match the same tone as the rest of the mini. So with that in mind, add in a very small amount of your highlight color to your mix. Keep the mix itself reasonably thin. We've been working at almost a glaze consistency for the vast majority of this. It allows you to do multiple passes and build up the opacity slowly. If you think about it, when you put a glaze on, you're getting a nice sort of diffuse bit of color over the miniature. The next time you put on the glaze, you put on a little bit less, and then a little bit less. And all that happens is you start to build the opacity in a smaller and smaller section at a time, which gives you a nice gradient across something. That's obviously a great tip for anything you're painting, but with faces, I feel it's really important. Hopefully, this helps you out. If you've got any questions, by all means, leave a comment. But if you'd like to get your question answered in real time, why don't you come and join me over on Twitch, where I live stream 4 days a week. We've also got a Patreon campaign that you can join and get videos just like this one every other week, as well as a full written tutorial every single week. Links to both of those are in the description below, and hopefully we'll see you in the streams. So here we go. Sorry for the slightly out of focus shot at this point. Was trying to make sure the miniature was absolutely spot on with its painting. You can see these final brush strokes that we're doing for this highlight step is really bringing the detail in the corner of this guy's eye really like up there and bringing it to life. Keep bringing your highlights up. As I said just now, get them nice and thin, glazy. And here you can see we're just trying to merge the red back in with the rest of the face. We want to like irritated skin, but that redness to come from within the skin. We've got more things to do to that later on. We're then adding in even more Sickly Skin. Now, as you get through your progressive highlights on the skin, you can use paint that's ever so slightly thicker because you're going to end up with a smaller highlight. But again, you want to keep the paint reasonably thin. We're talking just slightly thicker than a glaze. We're not talking straight out of the pot. Now start hitting all of the brighter areas. We're talking anything that's got like a wrinkle like this area around the eye, but the tops of the cheekbone, the end of the nose, maybe the bottom of the chin. These are the areas where they are angular. They're going to catch the light, and it's going to emphasize those bits of detail when that happens naturally. Now here, I had a look at the miniature and I decided that there was a darker shadow, a little bit too much of a shadow above the eye. So I got an earlier mix from our paints, thinned that back down, and then painted that over that area to just take away some of the darkness from that area. Because of the Bugman's Glow mix that we used earlier on, that glaze that we put on to take all of the shades, it meant that we could just do that and just get a nice, smooth application across our skin. Now we're going back to that previous mix of stubble that we had, and we just painted that over the highlights we just put on the bottom part of the face to ensure that everything there looks natural. Whilst you've got a nice area of darker skin because of the stubble, you still want the highlights there. So that back and forth motion with your paintbrush and going back to a previous mix is really, really useful. We're doing some Seraphim Sepia now and putting that over the top part of the miniature. This is going to give it a very slightly yellow effect as if it's being lit by natural light. And then we're going to add a little bit more detail here. I want some veining to happen around this kind of awful bionic implant that this guy's got going on. So we took some Kador red, thinned it down, painted on some nice, neat little lines with it. And then we're going to go back to our Cadian flesh tone mix that we used earlier on, one of our lighter highlights, turn that right down into a glaze, and maybe 3 or 4 entire passes with this will start to just take away some of the vividness and the brightness of that red. Anytime you're doing anything that should be underneath the skin, whether it's blood effects or tattooing or whatever, that's what you need to do. And that's pretty much it. Hopefully you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, then hit the like button. If you've really enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button. And if you really, really like it, again, why don't you come over on Twitch where you can ask questions in real time, enter giveaways every month, and more. I'm going to leave you with some B-roll footage of this guy. We have got a video tutorial over on Patreon, which will be all about how to freehand those fancy Black Templar shoulder pads. And next week's YouTube video will be how to paint armor just like this without an airbrush. Hopefully we'll catch you in the streams and in that next video. Peace out, everyone. Take care.